Chapter 8 The Pharmacist. A boy in a school uniform sprinted towards the direction of the female medical ward. He ran into a nurse, but he didn't even have time to apologize. His face was drenched with sweat and his palms were sweaty. When he arrived at the destination, he rushed to bed number 5 where his mother was lying. The boy suddenly halted when he saw that bed number 5 was surrounded by medical students and nurses, and one doctor was standing at the head of the bed. Using a metal bar, the doctor was trying to pry a female patient's mouth open to insert an endotracheal tube. The patient on the bed struggled. There was a wheezing sound in her throat. The boy saw mucus mixed with blood running from the corner of her mouth. "Stop!" The boy, who had just arrived, shouted on the top of his lungs. All eyes of the people in the area were on him. His eyes were red while panting. "I said stop!" The resident who was trying to insert the tube didn't even bother to look up. After he had successfully inserted it, he quickly snatched a stat on his shoulder to make sure that the tube got into a windpipe, not the esophagus.
"The patient started to have respiratory failure. I had no choice."
The boy pushed himself through the crowd to stand in front of them to look at his mother, who seemed unconscious at the moment. A scary amount of blood mixed with mucus appeared in the endotracheal tube, and the nurse was sucking the mucus from it. Every time the tube got into her windpipe, his mother's face revealed pained expression, and it was so painful for a son like him to watch.
"Mom!"
The boy's vision blurred with tears. One of the nurses walked up to him and tried to pull him out.
"She's been through enough. Don't hurt her."
The nurse looked at him with sympathy. "The doctor was doing his best trying to help your mother. You go sit down outside first."
"There's no cure for her illness."
Tears streaked down on the boy's face. His eyes were darkened and empty.
"Why does the doctor have to hurt her again?"
The young nurse was slightly taken aback before leading him to the waiting room in front of the ward. "Wait here." When the young nurse turned back to her duty, the boy got to his feet, walking towards the door to the medical ward. He tried to find a spot where he could see his mother. The boy sobbed when he saw the doctor, who previously inserted the tube for his mother, climbed on the bed and pressed both of his hands on her chest with constant rhythm.
"Mom!"
The boy in school uniform fell to his knees. He tried to hold onto the wall with one hand.
"Doctor! Mom doesn't want to be hurt anymore. Doctor, stop doing this to her."
The bystanders' hearts were filled with pity by the boy's heart-wrenching sobs. The memories when she was receiving a treatment from this hospital flashed back to the boy's mind. His poor mother was diagnosed with ovarian cancer in advanced stage where the cancer had spread to other organs, and she was suffering from chemotherapy side effects. Her pretty face began to look gaunt. Her silky long black hair fell out. Only small patches remained.
"If I get into medical school, I'll find a way to treat you, Mom. You have to wait until I become a doctor,"
the boy said while holding her hand. His mother looked at him and smiled gently. "You must not treat only me, darling. If you become a doctor, you must also treat others." Her extremely thin hands held her son's firmly. "If it's possible, be the doctor who doesn't cure only people's illness, but also help them eliminate the suffering like I've been enduring. Make the patients who were ill like me accept their illness, accept the way of nature, and bring those patients to peace towards the end of their lives, son." After a long period of trying to save her life, the mother of the boy died with endotracheal tubes still in her throat. IV tubes linked to saline bottles, antibiotics, cardiac stimulants, and hospital monitor lines were raked around her. The bed sheets were still damp from mucus and blood during the process of blood collection. On the nurse's medical cart, it was still full with medicine tubes used during the resuscitation. People moving around her bed to clean up the place. One of the nurses came up to remove the antitractable tube and all the IV lines from her body. Then she pulled up the blanket to cover the deceased face. If she was going to die regardless, why did her final moments have to end this way? He used to picture himself sitting at the edge of his mother's bed with her favorite rose bouquet in his hands. He was holding her hand, looking at the most beautiful woman in his life pass away peacefully, gracefully, and painlessly in a bright, clean, peaceful place. So, the scene of her struggling before she died became a memory that he would never forget. Gunn opened his eyes when an alarm from a phone rang. The sound was unfamiliar because it originated from the phone of the person who was sleeping next to him. He looked at Vassan, who was still sleeping, unmoved, as if he didn't hear the alarm at all. Gunn reached for Vassan's phone at the bedside table. Digital numbers on the screen indicated that it was 6 a.m. Gunn turned off the alarm and turned back to the man who was still sleeping like a rock. He understood Vassan's fatigue after his restless double shifts. He could definitely relate to that. Back when he was a medical intern, he also went through these sleepless night shifts. It was reasonable that Vassan passed out as soon as he was sated.
Hey.
Gunn shook Vassan.
I wanted to let you go on sleeping if you didn't tell me you have some task this morning.
Vassan made a soft noise in his throat before his eyes, which always looked at Gunn stubbornly, gradually opened. Gunn flashed his smile as a gesture for good morning before leaning down to kiss the older man's forehead. Gunn could sense some sort of uneasiness or discomfort from Vassan since last night. Although the new day had already begun, Gunn could still feel the tension lingered on.
When will you stop frowning, babe?
Gunn used his thumb to caress along the ridge of Vassan's eyebrows and massaged the area between his knitted eyebrows.
I have many things to think about.
Vassan closed his eyes and turned to the opposite side. He lied still, as if he was mentally dealing with something, before pushing himself up. A white blanket fell from Vassan's body, revealing the skin underneath down to his buttocks. Originally, based on the northern genetics, Vassan's skin was fair. However, he had been exposed to the sun on several occasions. His skin eventually turned a shade of tan. It was a very attractive skin tone for Gunn.
Is there something you haven't told me?
Gunn's gaze followed Vassan, who got to his feet and took the towel.
No,
Vassan answered courtly.
It seems like you have something on your mind.
Gunn began to use his reassurance and sympathy technique.
If you need any help, you can tell me.
Vassan turned to face Gunn with a serious expression. He stared like he wanted to see through Gunn's heart.
Not yet. If I need anything, I'll tell you myself. No need to squeeze it out of me.
Gunn raised both hands in surrender. An introvert will always be an introvert, despite the fact that they had been sleeping with each other every time they had a chance. Right now, it was like each of them were standing on different sides of the mirror. The mirror was transparent that they could see one another but couldn't reach out to touch.
All right, no more questions.
Vassan walked into the bathroom without saying a word. Gunn clasped his hands behind his head while looking at the ceiling of the hotel where both of them chose to spend the night together. He actually wanted to bring Vassan over to his house, but there was some inconvenience that prevented him from doing just that. He needed to find a new way. Perhaps he'd better find a decent rental house or buy a condominium and ask the man to move in with him. Gunn was serious with this relationship. He had never committed to anyone as he would with Vassan. There was a rare chemistry between them. Not many people would make him feel so into them from the first moment they met. He saw cuteness hidden under the appearance of the stern and courageous officer. It was some sort of adorability that he could never feel if he hadn't grown closer to him. Gunn pictured his future with this man. When a valuable thing was within his grasp, he wouldn't let it go easily, no matter what. Murder.
You worry too much, Vassan.
The Deputy Superintendent Bird said when Vassan came to ask for an advice.
It could or could not relate to that. You shouldn't link this case to other dead people yet. You should focus on this case and finish the final report.
Yes, he might be over-suspicious, but this word kept popping up in his head every time he saw the statistical data of the terminal stage patients who had died in the past 3 years. Tay had sent the statistical numbers of the terminal patients in his responsible sub-district, along with the 2 nearby sub-districts to Vassan. On the surface, it might look like natural death from the illness. However, the rapidly increasing numbers of the dead unusually contradicted the assessment of the treatment team in the last 3 years. Especially last year, the number was so extraordinary that it couldn't be ignored. Before this, no one suspected the cause of death enough to request for the autopsy. Only the latest case that had an autopsy revealed something suspicious.
Where should I begin?
Vassan rubbed his hair that was cut so short that his scalp could be seen while watching the desk full of case files. Perhaps talking to the expert might help shed some light on the case. But that expert must not be Dr. Kantabat, since not only that guy wouldn't give the useful answer, he also liked to keep distracting him. After sending a suspect on a drug charge to the forensic lab, Vassan asked for Dr. Bunnicket's time to discuss further details on significant amount of antidepressant found in the corpse's blood, which was indicated as the cause of the death. Bunnicket led Vassan to a physician lounge behind the emergency room.
Is it really a murder, Dr. Bunnicket?
Bunnicket pressed his lips in a thin line, seemed deep in thought.
Based on the patient's condition, it's unlikely that he'd be able to inject that substance into blood vessels himself. There's a witness who saw someone breaking in the house at that time, but nothing was taken. Do you have an opinion on this? If that person really was the offender, then he must be a health professional. It wasn't just his injection skill that triggered my suspicion, but also his supplies of the medicine. Where could he get the medicine if he wasn't a person working in this field?
Bunnicket glanced at Vassan's face.
Inspector, you should ask the staff at the medical warehouse or at the pharmacist department if there was any unusual prescriptions or medicine relocations from the warehouse. Normally, the pharmacy room has a recording system of input and output, showing which doctors were the prescribers. If the stolen medicine really comes from the hospital, you might be able to find some clues.
He must thank this forensic pathologist for the interesting point.
If there's no unusual activities, then the medicine might come from somewhere else. It's possible, but the incident occurred in the responsible area of the hospital. Plus, the medicine is an intravenous drug that cannot be found in general pharmacy stores. It's most likely that the drug was taken from here. Alright, thank you very much, Doctor. If I have something else, I'll need to consult with you again.
Vassan nodded his head slightly to say goodbye.
It's my pleasure, Inspector. I'll fully cooperate as long as I still work here. So you'll leave in a few months? It's such a shame that I have an opportunity to work with a clever forensic pathologist like you for a very short period.
Vassan said thank you to Benekit again and excused himself from the area of the emergency room. He walked to ask the information desk for the pharmacist room's direction without any delays. He wanted to gather as much information as he could in this short period of time. Vassan's police uniform made him stand out from the crowd. It was inevitable that he was the center of attention of both medical personnel and patients until he reached the destination. Vassan approached a tall young man with a fair skin and a short lab coat. Chanchai Farm D was embroidered in green thread on his lab coat. The man was busy putting labels in a little basket.
Hello? May I ask you a question?
The young pharmacist looked up at Vassan. His desolate eyes were wide open and frightened. The basket containing medicines in his hands fell to the ground. Medical plastic bags scattered on the floor. Vassan furrowed his eyebrows at the pharmacist's reaction.
I'm sorry. I'm easily startled.
He laughed dryly before bending down to collect falling things. Vassan sat down to help him pick up medical plastic bags into the previous container.
Thank you. I'm handling a case of a patient who died from benzodiazepine overdose through blood vessels.
Vassan's sharp eyes stared at the pharmacist's face.
I wanted to ask if the staff of the pharmacy room if there's been any unusual prescription on this drug.
Pharmacist Chanchai shook his head. Vassan noticed huge beads of sweat on the man's temple while they got on their feet.
Not that I know of. Some nurses might have taken some drugs and prescriptions because they accidentally dropped some medical ampules. Or the doctors might prescribe wrong medications, sometimes even repeated prescriptions, but nothing seems unusual to me. Sure, thanks.
Vassan had a feeling that he should interrogate more people in order to be sure. Plus, this man's reaction seemed very interesting.
By the way, where can I find the person who's in charge of the medical warehouse? Walk down the hallway on the left of this room, officer. Go straight to room 30 and ask for the chief of medical warehouse. His name is Samkyat. Pharmacist Boos, are you done?
A staff called him through the glass window. The man turned to look at the caller and then turned back to Vassan nervously.
Excuse me, I've got to get back to work.
He bowed slightly to excuse himself and went to meet the staff, who was waiting for his medicine. Vassan considered the man who was called Pharmacist Boos for a while. He precisely memorized his face, name, and position. Although the information he received might not reveal anything unusual, there was one thing that was peculiar: the pharmacist's strange behavior when he saw him. Vassan left the inpatient pharmacy and went towards the direction Pharmacist Boos told him. When he arrived at the area where the patients were waiting for their checkups, he met the person who made him swiftly turn back. When Dr. Gantapat walked out of the examination room and saw someone who stood out from the crowd, he was surprised. With the way he dressed, Gunn could figure that he was Vassan from 100 miles away. Vassan closed his eyes momentarily to calm his mind and turned to face Gunn, who walked towards him.
You miss me so much that you decide to come and see me here?
That annoying smile made him clench his fist tightly, and a thought came to his mind that people might not mind if the police officer punched the doctor in the middle of the hospital.
Get over yourself. I'm working. I'm not here to see you.
Vassan suddenly thought of something.
Since you're here, please do something useful for once. Do you know the pharmacist named Boos? Yes, I do.
Gunn answered immediately.
Are there any rumors about him? There's no rumors about Pharmacist Boos. He and I aren't particularly close. We've visited the patients together only a few times. All I know is that Booze is quite shy. Mostly he stays in the pharmacy room and rarely comes out for me to see him. He's quite good looking. I thought about asking him on a date once.
Gunn's words made Vassan feel like his heart was jerked out of his chest for a second, although he didn't have any reasons to feel that way. He looked at Gunn out of the corner of his eyes.
I knew it. Asking you is pointless as always. Don't you want to know why I gave up on the idea of asking him on a date?
Vassan turned on his heels to continue his work.
No. Your answers would never help me. I gave up because now I'm going blind. I cannot see anyone but you.
Vassan suddenly halted. Gunn's eyes looked at his close-cropped hair. His broad back in a khaki uniform went stiff, unmoving for a second, before he continued walking firmly without saying anything. The distance between the two men grew further and further, until Vassan turned at the corner and disappeared from Gunn's eyes.
The police already knew. What should I do? What should I do? What should I do?
For half an hour, Booze was unable to do anything except for walking back and forth around his room in a hospital staff residence. He uttered the same phrase over and over like a lunatic. His hands clasped together tightly to stop his uncontrollable trembling. The sound of wind whistling from summer thunderstorms outside was nothing compared to the current storm inside his head. The striking lightning that flashed through the window made him even more deranged.
Ah!
He threw off a wooden box full of bulbs containing ready-for-use colorless liquid medicine. The box fell on the floor, followed by the bulbs like drops of rain. The tall man walked towards his bed and put his hands on his temples. His eyes widened and full of terror.
What should I do?
The only sound that could stop voices in his head was the thunder. Although it might be just temporary, but his trembling hands really stopped shaking. The man looked up slowly. His red eyes gradually took in the sight of the messy room, as if it was hit by a storm. Books on the shelves were wiped down to the floor from this rampage. Document papers scattered in all directions. He had to do this. Violence was the only thing that could extinguish his fear. Those sharp eyes of the police officer had been haunting him every second. He needed to find a way to get them disappear from his life before the owner of those eyes would take away his life.
Kill. The police.
No one heard those words except for himself as they came out of his mouth at the same time as the thunder roared. His tears also trickled down at the same time as the sky above started to cry. The drops of the rain poured down loudly on the rooftop of the hospital staff residence, drowning the young man's voice completely.